Hey everyone, I'm rather Incoherent, and today we're gonna get started with a series of videos talking about investigator power level in Arkham Horror, and specifically, I'm gonna be starting off with all of the characters I view as the weakest. The characters who in my tier list end up going into the bottom 2 tiers. Today, as I'm sure you're already well aware, we're talking about Amina Zidane, but she's gonna be poster child for 2 things. One of them obviously is being bad at the game. But this isn't just a series of videos where I talk about why characters are bad. Part of this is that I want to talk about why they're bad, obviously, but I also want to talk about how they can be good, because I think even the worst character in the game can beat campaigns. I think being bad is really more relative to other investigators than it is to the campaign itself, because with 2 exceptions, I think pretty much every character can keep pace with the game. There are only 2 characters that I think are bad relative to the challenges posed to you, as opposed to bad because they're being compared to other investigators. And Amina is bad because she's compared to other investigators. I have done really well in a campaign as Amina, but I haven't done better than basically any other mystic. I've just succeeded at my role. So remember that when I'm calling these characters weak and terrible and saying there's no reason to play them, I'm not saying they can't win. I'm just saying that they are the worst characters in the game. Now, with that big disclaimer about what we're doing and the purpose of the series out of the way, let's start talking about Amina. First of all, she is a mystic with 3s in all of her stats. That's a terrible place to start. Because Amina is the first video we're doing, I'm going to cover the whole 3s in all of your stat lines problem for anyone who's not on the same page, anyone who's newer to the game. You might initially see, if you're new to the game, when you first start out, you might see 3s in all your stats and think you're equally capable of doing anything with this stat line. But that's actually the wrong way of looking at it, because a 3 is not good enough to succeed. A 3 in every stat means you're equally incapable of doing everything. Using book as an example, something that anyone who's getting clues is going to need to do is be able to test at 5 book to beat a 3-shroud location by 2. That's like the bare minimum thing you need to do on standard difficulty if you're getting clues with book. You need to reach 5. 3 starts out in a really big hole. The same thing is true when you're using fist to kill smaller enemies, and the same thing is true when you're using foot or head in the mythos phase. The difference is that foot and head are often fine as 3s because you do the mythos phase once a round, whereas you might do fighting or clubing several times in one round. So while 3 in head and foot defensively isn't terrible, proactively she starts out in a big hole, and typically what you find when you're in this big of a hole, so you try to make both stats work, you spend your whole deck and your whole scenario setting up to make your character able to use book and fist, and then the scenario ends and you're way behind tempo where you should have been, and you'd have been better off abandoning one of the stats and focusing on either using your book or your fist, or in the case of Amina, as a mystic, her head. So what you end up with these characters who have a 3 in their stats is someone who has to put in a lot of work to get to a workable number, who has a fundamentally inefficient stat line where making your character able to do one thing results in your fist being wasted, or in this case, both your book and your fist being wasted. Amina has the worst stat line of any mystic, because even if you use the support that came with her, there's still no reason to build for book or fist. Those support items that came with Amina can use head as well, and it's easier for a mystic to boost head than these other 2 stats. So Amina's stat line is god-awful. She's a mystic that only cares about her head, and to a lesser degree her foot, and that's about as low as you can possibly put those. There is no other 3-head mystic. Diane is technically a 1, but she will scale up very quickly to be much higher than Amina is. Now, with investigators that are closer to being really good or have really clear strengths or weaknesses, I'll mention their signature cards. But honestly, Word of Woe, Word of Weal, and Deafening Silence have no real impact on Amina, because the problem is this stat line and this card pool. Because the card pool really is just Mystic with a couple of random charm assets. And the charm assets do help. There's one very specific asset I care about quite a lot, and that asset is Sparrow Mask, because it's a very easy way to get +2 head recursively. You might say, oh, but you can't use it at the same time as Cat Mask. If you have either mask in play, you can do an impression of a 5-head mystic very briefly, and a 5-head mystic is a great place to live. Your feedback effects from Clairvoyance and Rite of Seeking, not Rite of Seeking, but from other ones like Shriveling, those can end up charging a Sparrow Mask. As Amina, you could instantly recharge a Cat Mask. Because Hemlock Vale came out and gave Amina these 2 cards to really boost up her ability to get this head to a workable number, you can actually play an Amina deck that's just a head-based mystic like you normally would, that has way more Cat Mask than anyone else. And you can later on use cards like Sin Eater and Blood Pact for even more value. But the big thing is just you're using the mask, you're getting your numbers good, and your unique ability as Amina, which I didn't cover previously. Coming to her ability, it's when you play an asset, you reduce its cost by 3, and it comes into play with 1 Doom on it, which is good for recharging a Cat Mask, and good for Doom synergies, but there's not a lot of Doom synergies that are actually worth running, especially when your deck's already taking up a ton of slots just trying to make yourself pass a skill test. So in this Amina deck, I've got an El Rubash, but it's really just because I might be able to like use Rite of Seeking much cheaper with her ability and then not deal with the Doom by using El and get even more stat pumps. I could use her ability on a Scroll of Prophecies and dig through my deck because I really gotta find these masks. And this is essentially a character where my ability isn't like enabling some unique Doom thing. The unique Doom things that you can do aren't really that powerful in purple. They're okay, but with 3 in my head, I need to fix that. And once I'm committing so much of the deck with El Rubash and 4 of Cups and 2 masks and the draw to find them, and then I have to like actually run assets to do my job, there's not a ton of deck space left to do much else. And what I found is that when I was looking at like more Doom-based Amina Zidanes, I felt like I was like very short on deck slots, there wasn't a ton of payoff, and they tended to be awkward because stuff like Abyssal Tome was only useful for a flex fighter, but as a flex, I can't really wander off on my own if my only method of fighting is Abyssal Tome. That's like a boss killing thing, and I ended up finding that I felt Amina was safest as a Kluver, and this is going to come up in bad Mystics very frequently. Mystics really don't want to be main fighter. I'm not going to cover that in too much detail here. I am actually, because it's going to come up every time we talk about a Mystic, and I don't want to make a video just on Mystic fighting being a bad place to live, so I'm going to cover the why of that just like I covered how 3s are a bad stat line. As a fighter, you have to be able to deal with a wide variety of situations with regards to enemies. You have to be able to kill a rat that your Kluver drew. You have to be able to kill like a generically chunky 3/3/3 guy that takes multiple hits if you have a 2 damage weapon. And you have to be able to deal with acolytes that spawn far away, so you have to have movement economy to get over to them and then kill them, and ideally kill them in a way that's not super wasteful, just like rats. And then you have to be able to deal with the boss, which could be like 8 health on a scenario 1 or like 20 health on a scenario 6. So there's a lot of different ways that you get tested as a fighter, and Mystic really just like, there's no fight assets here, but you either deal 2 or 3 damage, and there are cards that let you chip out the other damage now, there's a way around it, but you start having more and more assets to put into play, and it's just so much harder as a Mystic because your movement tech sucks to go kill an acolyte and then come back and kill the rat and then kill a boss. Your resources are harder to ration out, your movement tech is going to really hold you back compared to literally any other color of fighter, and you end up in a situation where main fighter Mystic, if your class does not your class, your card pool doesn't give you a lot pushing you towards it, main fighter just doesn't make sense. And I will actually go so far as to say that I think no current Mystic has enough pushing them towards main fighter that I would run any of them as main fighter. And that's not to say you can't, you absolutely can, but to say that they're all better off playing Flex or Kluver. Even characters with tons of fight support like Dexter Drake is best off playing a Flex, that way he can super greedily aim for just the best fighting stuff, and then instead of running weapons to more consistently find his fight stuff, he can just run the best clue finding stuff and be the best of both worlds as opposed to having a lower end low roll. Instead, he just doesn't fight if he fails to find his weapons, and he puts some more pressure on your fighter early until he finds that Cyclopean Hammer. So Flex is a thing that your card pool can push you into pretty regularly, I find, as a Mystic, but their default state of being, because they're not great at fighting and not great at moving, is just to be the main Kluver. And you can play them as Flex if your team needs you to, and it doesn't hurt them very much at all, but they never want to be main fighter. And the moment I find that my deck is like really struggling just to do a one thing, I've got so many card slots devoted to fixing this head stat, suddenly I don't want to flex anymore. I just want my deck to consistently go online doing one thing, because now the idea of flexing is like I have to find specifically my head bumps and the fist icon, and then if there's not an enemy, I don't need that in the deck sitting clunkier. I like being a Kluver in Amina because the deck can be streamlined towards one goal and there are no compromises. And everything I just said will generally apply to every Mystic in the game. They're better off as Kluver, they're fine, not a meaningful downgrade as Flex, and you really don't want them main fighting. And I've been showing you like the level 55 version of a deck, but for a Mystic, that's dirt cheap. You have 2 copies of Arcane Rabbit Search. You have 2 copies of Arcane Research and 1 copy of Down the Rabbit Hole. And with somewhere around 20 extra experience over the course of a campaign, 55 is nothing. And coming over to the level 0 version, it's largely the same deck. The cards that are new are Blood Pact, which is pretty minor, Sin Eater, which is pretty minor, El Rubash, which is like your #1 priority, and then like Ghastly Possession, which doesn't matter at all. And you can go pretty much the entire campaign with Manual Dex or Unexpected Courage or some other card instead of it. The deck at level 0 is pretty much the exact same concept. You're still just using in the thick of it because you have to get this 4 of Cups in the deck. You need Holy Rosary and 4 of Cups or a mask, and then you're off to the races. And having to get all that really holds her down. She's sort of locked into this one deck where she's just fixing her head stat and then playing the Mystic clue game. She's not all downside, She's better at cat mask than anyone else. Scroll of Prophecies is prohibitively expensive in every other mystic, but Amina Zidane's got so much economy that it doesn't cost her anything. The fact that you're able to make this deck that runs literally no economy cards is genuinely unique to Amina and a strength she has. And Amina could become a much better character in future expansions if they just keep printing really uniquely expensive mystic cards that other mystics like look at and like, oh, I don't know if I fit that in my deck with the economy to run it. I have to like make room for 4 cards because I need the scroll and the economy. And with any new card, that would be the same debate. But if they keep printing like big, expensive, dangerous mystic items, or assets rather, that's more stuff that Amina can use her ability on, and that's stuff that will uniquely make Amina more powerful. So she actually does stand a real chance at eventually getting out of the F tier that I currently have her in. Right now, I have her at the top of my F tier. I don't even think she's the worst mystic. I think she handles her 3 heads so well that she is better than Jim, who legitimately does not have an ability and has basically the same deck building where he's going to pick up a Sparrow Mask and then 3 other cards for the exact same reasons. But while I am open to any discussion about anything on any part of the tier list, I will say, as always, and this is just gonna be a one-time preface, I'm not gonna repeat this in every video, this tier list is not something set in stone. Characters move up really hard on hype, they move down really hard on cynicism. Silas has a chance to fall even further than this. And there are characters that are being moved very realistically where you can't really tell the difference looking at this. Is Silas moving down on cynicism, Lily up on optimism? Am I being cautious moving Winifred only this high? When I actually sit down to make a final tier list and really discuss every character in great detail compared to every other character, that's gonna be a point in time where I'm like locked in and my opinions are officially hot takes. Like right now, obviously I hate Bob, and if you think Bob should be like in C tier or above, like once they're multiple tiers away from where you think they are, feel free to talk to me about it. But if you think they're minorly off, there's a very real chance I agree with you. Anyway, getting back to the tier list, despite Amina's weaknesses, since Hemlock Vale helps cover them so much, I really don't think she deserves to be considered one of the worst characters in the game. I think Lola and Calvin are miles worse than everyone else in the game. I think Bob, Safina, and Jem are all worse than Amina. And 2 of those characters are hot takes that we'll be covering in their own videos relatively soon. But I genuinely don't think Amina struggles very hard to do her job in campaigns. She has no unique strengths. She's pretty much just digging in the bag with arcane assets head to shroud and getting it done. It's not particularly impressive, it's not particularly strong, but it's good enough to do her job as main clover. It's also, I think, fairly appropriate that Amina and Marie are so low on the tier list because the Doom archetype's just not there. It never has been, and maybe someday it will be, but every time they print support for Doomed, it's just nowhere near good enough. It's like, oh yeah, these cards have Doom on them. That doesn't make them good. It's just like how clue dropping isn't good inherently. You have to do something to push the archetype. They need cards where it's like, oh, you placed a Doom on your card, just take an action, right? There's no press pass for Doomed, and dropping a Doom is worse than dropping a clue, so it just doesn't have anywhere near the support it needs to, and these characters that are built around Doomed really struggle due to the lack of support as a result, because they just end up being characters with bad stat lines and weak abilities because their archetype isn't there yet. Coming back to the Amina deck list very briefly, the reason I'm not showing like a middle point deck for her, this will actually pop up a lot in future videos as well, is because there's not like a deck core to talk about, right? She's a mystic. You just upgrade your cards in the way Arcane Research and Down the Rabbit Hole let you. You get 5 experience, you figure out how to make sure you get your 4 bonus experience, and then you say, all right, what's the best new card I can buy to make sure I keep getting Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research in future buys? And aside from immediately get El Ribash as soon as you can to the point of like banking experience after you make use of these 2 permanents, there's really nothing else in the deck that matters. Ghastly Possession is minor, Blood Pact is minor, Sin Eater is definitely the most valuable because you might find yourself in a situation where you spend an action to eventually get the benefits of a Doom, and you know, that's just emergency cash. That's what Sin Eater does. You can just emergency cash whenever you want by playing an asset. So Sin Eater is like somewhat important, but nowhere near the degree that El Ribash is for managing the Doom. And then Blood Pact is again very nice. It's a way to, anytime you can easily manage Doom, just get +3 head, which is what the whole deck is about, but they're not as important as El is, not in my opinion. And realistically, like a 29 experience deck, or since you're a mystic, more like a 35 to 40 experience deck, would just be a bunch of upgrades on your arcane assets with as much of El Ribash, Sin Eater, and Blood Pact as you can afford to cram in at that point. Anyways, I really don't have a lot more to say about Amina because the problem's fairly straightforward. The archetype she's printed for, the Doomed archetype, hasn't seen enough support to make it worth really building around. Her stat line is bad, but can be overcome, and you're left with a relatively small pool of charms to help out Amina, and that's pretty much it. She's able to overcome her problems and function and do her job, but she's in no way exceptional and doesn't really have anything going for her. I think a lot of the community hate for Amina is built around playing her before Hemlock Vale came out, and I understand that, because I thought Amina was an unspeakably trash investigator, easily bottom 3 right there with Calvin and Lola before Hemlock Vale. But with the addition of Cat Mask and even a backup Sparrow Mask, I really think she's fine. Not like relative to other investigators. Compared to other investigators, dear God, pick any other Mystic, maybe not Gem or Marie. But like relative to the game, she's going to do okay. I want to be clear that I say this from experience. Before Hemlock came out, I proxied Cat Mask and played Amina Zidane with Cat Mask. And I felt like, wow, I would really like an additional copy of Cat Mask, so I would end up running Sparrow Mask if I played the deck again. This Living Ink was really unnecessary and useless, I found most of the time, so it should definitely have been a backup Sparrow Mask instead of a proxied Cat Mask. And when I say Abyssal Tome really wasn't worth running, I spent a really fight-heavy campaign running Abyssal Tome and consistently felt like I shouldn't have bothered to run it. And in this campaign, I was main Kluver. We were never struggling with clues. It was always the fight side, and even though we were struggling on fighting, I never felt like Abyssal Tome was a good card to have in my deck that was going to make the difference. So coming back to end it on the tier list, Amina is my gatekeeper out of F tier because of all the F tier characters. She's the one where when I play her in a campaign, I genuinely feel like it's fine. I don't think she's unable to meet the challenges of a campaign. I just think that I should play anyone else instead, not Jim. But like, of all the F tier characters, this is the one where playing it feels like there was a reason to pick Amina. It wasn't a good reason, because she actually has an ability that's meaningfully lifting her up, and she's doing stuff that other characters couldn't with her uniquely expensive assets, and she's meeting the challenges of the campaign. The characters more in the middle of F tier are characters where I feel like they struggle more aggressively and have less unique benefits, and the characters at the bottom I think are genuinely bad characters that might actually struggle to get you through a campaign. But Amina is the gatekeeper out of F tier, where if you're not doing better than Amina, you're bad. And you can argue that means that Amina should be at the bottom of weak. But I don't think she's performing at the same level as a Marie. I think being down that extra stat's really problematic. I think never getting a free action like Marie does is a problem. Although you can argue that Amina does sort of get free actions with her ability, realistically I found that I pretty consistently had to actually spend an action to play that emergency cash by eating the Doom on Sin Eater. So at the end of the day, Marie's able to beat campaigns. F tier doesn't mean unplayable. It doesn't mean they won't win a campaign. It doesn't even mean they won't get most of the victory. The card pool's come a huge distance since the original days of the game. But it does mean that compared to everyone else in the game, I look at Amina and I'm like, wow, if I want to play Doomed, I don't say I could have played Marie. I'm like, I could just play a Dexter deck and use Dexter's ability to eat the Doom cards. He's better at it than anyone who was printed for it, right? And that's what F tier really means. Just play somebody else. Not because this character has to be awful, although 2 of them are, but because these characters aren't strong and don't have good reasons to play them. If I had to try to describe exactly what F tier meant beyond just being weak, it's that they're weak in a way where it feels like there's no reason to pick them. That even when everything's going right, they're not gonna pop off, they're not gonna be incredible, they're just getting through the game, and they're struggling and requiring optimization just to do that. A weak character is gonna have moments where you're glad you're playing them. A bad character is gonna have moments where you're surprised it's okay. I think that's, in my mind, the big difference in D and F. But regardless of like trying to pin down exactly what makes someone F, I think I've said everything I have to say about Amina. I've been rather incoherent, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to me talk about what makes Amina playable, but why you really should play other Mystics instead. If you did enjoy me ranting about why Amina's bad, or why Amina's actually okay, or why you shouldn't play Mystic Fighters, or why all 3s is a terrible stat line, I'd appreciate it if you could do all the YouTube algorithm stuff, drop a comment, leave a like, blah blah blah, you know the drill. And before I go, a massive thank you to everyone supporting me over on Patreon.